I wanted to love this book so much that I kind of wish I hadn't read it so I could live in the ignorant bliss that it was brilliant as everybody said it was. But unfortunately I did read it, and it's not. In this Jessie, I will... So I recently finished reading Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. This is a library copy. It is very late back to the library. I am so sorry to the person who was on the waiting list after me. If you recognise the name Jeanette McCurdy, it'll either be from two places, from playing Sam on iCarly for Nickelodeon, or for her autobiography, I'm Glad My Mum Died, which I personally loved. Now, I did listen to her reading it on audiobook rather than reading it in physical book form like this, so maybe that explains why I had such a different experience with this than I did with her autobiography. Just for clarity, I loved her autobiography. I'm afraid I really didn't love this, and I really wanted to, because I really like Jeanette McCurdy. I loved her autobiography. I even showed my hairdresser a picture of Jeanette McCurdy once, because I wanted hair like her. I mean, look! Do you see it? And listen, before you say anything, I have seen a lot of criticism of this book, and people saying the only reason people didn't like this book is because of the subject matter. Now, I am someone who is very not shaken by subject matter of the media that I watch. The only thing that really disturbs me is like if something's very gory. For context, Half His Age is a novel about a 17-year-old girl named Waldo who enters a sexual relationship with her teacher. At no point in this novel is it acknowledged that the 17-year-old girl is named Waldo. There's not a single sentence in this book about that being a weird name for a 17-year-old girl to have. You mean to tell me that this 17-year-old girl goes to school with the first name Waldo and doesn't have a single joke made about her and those books? There's not a single "Where's Waldo" joke in this. And yes, he says her name during sex, and it's Waldo, and we're supposed to just read that. You can't name your 17-year-old protagonist Waldo and not have any sort of acknowledgement that that's really weird. Why is she called Waldo? I'm not American, right? But as far as I'm aware, that's not a normal name to give your 17-year-old child. Why is she called Waldo? Anyway, so it is a dark subject. But this book is about very dark subject matter, written in extreme sexual detail, in a voice that is incredibly YA. The prose in this book is just so young and underdeveloped, and it is a debut novel, so part of that could be that this is a debut novel, but the prose was just bad. I feel bad saying that because I really want Jeanette McCurdy to keep writing books, I really do. But this book explores the subject of a 17-year-old being in a relationship with an adult in a way that sucks any emotion or depth or tension out of that concept. When I, as an adult, read a book that explores this subject, I want the perpetrator to get caught. I don't want this teenager to enter a relationship with the adult who is grooming her. But there is no place in this book where I am left as the reader, turning the pages, wishing that he gets caught on the next page. That tension is not here. There's a scene where Waldo is at Mr. Corgi's house. They are having sex. She is on her period. And then the wife comes home. Mr. Corgi's wife comes home. So Waldo has to quickly hide in the wardrobe. Now, this is one of the few scenes where I actually did feel a sense of tension because, again, I'm an adult reading this book. I want him to get caught because you want this affair to be ended. You want him to get caught, you want him to get repercussions for grooming a 17-year-old, right? However, the scene that should just be Waldo hiding in the wardrobe and us as the reader flipping going, oh my goodness, is he going to get caught? Is she going to find out? Is the wife going to find out? Is overshadowed by the incredibly graphic depiction of the fact that while she's hiding in the wardrobe, she is on her period. So she is bleeding all over herself and all over the floor. And that is described in graphic detail. She's having to like catch her own blood so that it doesn't get on the carpet. It does because she's naked in there. And that is what we're forced to read about over the high stakes situation that is wanting the perpetrator of this like violence to get caught. That is where the stakes should be. But instead, we are forced to read about the completely irrelevant detail, which is that she's on her period. Whether the 17-year-old is on her period or not doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is I want the paedophile to be caught. That just goes to show that I feel this book was written with the intention of shocking me more than it was written with the intention of making any sort of real statement or conversation around the subject of grooming in a book that is about grooming. And I find that really sad because I think Jeanette McCurdy probably has a lot of really interesting, nuanced, important, deep things to say about that subject because of her past. But unfortunately, none of that comes through in this book. Instead, what we get are extremely graphic depictions of sex in scenes that have no tension. And that's really disappointing. This book also suffers from a problem that I like to call prose for the sake of prose. At no point when I'm reading this book do I believe that I am reading the thoughts of a 17-year-old girl. And that is something that I know other people disagree with me about, but this prose reads as a person writing prose for the first time who's trying to make their prose sound like prose. It doesn't sound like thoughts, but it also doesn't sound like an exploration of thought or feeling. It is simply sentences that describe what's happening. And the biggest tell of this is the constant need to put everything into groups of 3. I'm going to give you some examples. By June, things with Corgi have settled back into a groove I know well, the same groove as before. I'm tired of being on the outside looking in, studying, observing, but never just being. Maybe it could be good to try to fit in, to try to be like them, to try to be my age. Jeanette, with peace and love, that's the same thing 3 times, babe. Until then, it's just a theory, a suggestion, an idea. I didn't need those 3 different words for the same thing. He says the words with such conviction that I want to believe them. I want to believe that he knows something I don't, that his version of reality is the real one, that there's some shade to this that I'm missing, something I'm not seeing because of being so wrapped up in it, so obsessive about it, so fanatic. If only I could zoom out, then I could see what he sees, that I am, in fact, in control, instead of feeling so out of it. Jeanette, please put the thesaurus down, girl. Put it down. Get thesaurus.com out of your internet history. Tell me what her body feels like. Tell me where that feeling sits in her body. Tell me what she notices in the room. Tell me what she's hearing. It's just questions. It's just sentences. This is just sentences. The problem as well is that she also does this in dialogue. The dialogue does not sound like dialogue a real person would say. So like, for example, here, the teacher is describing to Waldo a fantasy he has about them running away to Hawaii together, and he says, I know it sounds juvenile, and it's not even really about Hawaii. Or it is, but only partially. It's mostly about time. Having enough of it, having plenty of it, never needing to rush. That's the same thing 3 times. Who talks like this? Who thinks like this? Who does this? Who has a thesaurus in their brain, giving them 3 different versions of every single sentence that crosses their brain? No one. Nobody. Not 17-year-old girls in high school. Not 42-year-old paedophile English teachers. Nobody. Nobody thinks like this. Why are we writing like this? This is why the book is so long. This is why it took me a month to read it when I was only given a week from the library. I'm sorry. But I love you, I say, and within 2 seconds I already wish that I hadn't. The words hang in the air in that constipated way they do when you know you shouldn't have said them, that you've gone too far. I want to add something, to clarify, to backpedal, or more than that, to take the words away. I'd been so careful about not saying them, about saving them up for just the right moment, which of course was whatever moment followed him saying them first. I thought it would be tender and romantic, but this was not tender. This was not romantic. With peace and love, that is the same thing about 6 times. Could have just opened the chapter with, I say the words and within 2 seconds I already wish I hadn't. And then move on to the next paragraph. He texted me an hour ago, blah, 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 blah. And then just skip to the part that says, but knowing better than to believe his words does nothing when you love the guy. If you love him, you just believe them. You believe him. You need to. You cling to his promises. You say stupid things. You say, but I love you. And have that be the moment we realize she's told him she loves him. We didn't need 3 different ways. And then the other thing that screams baby prose to me is the way that Jeanette McCurdy is obsessed with starting each chapter in the middle of a scene. But also, she doesn't know how to transition out of a scene in any other way than starting a new chapter. So for example, chapter 57 starts with, are you having fun? Nolan asks. We're at a party at his friend's parents' cabin, and then it goes on to explain what's going on at the party. But then chapter 57 ends On the next page, there's chapter 58. Every single chapter in this book is 2 to 3 pages long. Look at this. There's chapter 62. There's chapter 63. There's chapter 64. There's chapter 65. 66. The chapters may as well be page numbers because it's a different chapter every single scene. But there is no rhyme or reason to which scenes are over-explained and which ones are bulldozed through. There are a couple of pretty egregious examples of this. Those being, the main character, Waldo, has a best friend who is a character in Waldo's life who she has this sort of love-hate relationship with, where it's made very clear that Waldo doesn't respect her and finds her incredibly annoying, but at the same time she's kind of the only close person that Waldo has other than her mother. The thing that makes the stakes high about Waldo and Franny, I think her name is, about their relationship, is that they go to the same school, so at any moment Franny could realise that Waldo has entered a sexual relationship with the teacher, Mr. Corgi. That is built up throughout the novel. One of the few points of tension in this book is this idea that Franny or anybody else at school might find out. And then chapter 48 just opens with, "He's an abuser," Franny says, jutting out her chin. "What a sick, sick man. This is absolutely disgusting." We jump right into the chapter in the middle of Waldo telling Franny. We don't get to read the scene where Waldo finally tells someone what's been going on between her and her teacher. We are dropped into that action halfway through for no reason. I want to read that scene. Why are there so many moments in this book where I am forced to read in far too much detail sex scenes between a 17-year-old and a 43-year-old or whatever, but the scenes that are interesting, those interesting character moments are skipped through for no reason? I want to read that scene where she tells her friend. I want to know what she's thinking as she sits there across from her friend and thinks, do I tell her, do I tell her, do I tell her? And then the moment where she finally feels like she just has to tell her, she just has to get it out there. That's the moment I want to read. I don't really care about the specifics of the sex act the 17-year-old's doing on the 42-year-old teacher. I want to read that. In chapter 35, we get this paragraph. "One time after school we have sex in his classroom's cleaning closet. I wrap my legs around him and ride him while he stands there bumping into the mop and the grimy yellow bucket it sits in, dirty water sloshing around with each thrust. We're interrupted by the classroom door creaking open when Mr. Wembley comes in looking for him. We stop cold, but the water keeps sloshing and we look at each other terrified. Then we hear the door close and Mr. Wembley's footsteps disappear." That tiny paragraph to explain the first time they almost get caught having sex at school. I want a chapter on that story. I want to know exactly what's going through both of their heads when they almost get caught and when this teacher almost gets outed to the school as a pedophile. That's what I want to happen, because I, as an adult reading this book, should want him to be caught. I should be wanting to click each next page going, oh my goodness, is this when he gets caught? Is this when he gets caught? Willing that other teacher to come through the door and catch them. But it's bulldozed through. There is no tension here. There are a couple of other issues I have with this book, but I don't want to go in too hard on hating it because I do want Jeanette McCurdy to keep writing novels, right? But the other issues I have with this book are there is a real discrepancy in how emotional the main character gets about things. For example, the moment where we see her fall in love with the English teacher for the first time is incredibly rushed. She basically just looks at him and decides she's in love with him for no reason. And then there's a scene where the English teacher tells her that he has to go off on spring break with his family, his wife and children. And she has like a panic attack, screaming, crying, snot. And it is described in real detail that she like is hyperventilating, sobbing because she's not going to see him for a week. Which is like, okay, she's an emotionally unstable 17-year-old, whatever. But then there's a scene later in the book when the teacher decides to ignore her at school and sort of soft breaks up with her, where she basically doesn't do anything. She comes to school, sees that he's ignoring her, and she's like, oh, he's ignoring me. Girl, you were screaming, crying, throwing up because you weren't going to see him for a week. You might not see him again. He might break up with you, and you're going, oh, he's pretending like he doesn't know me, that sucks. What? Huh? Maybe that's the point. Maybe she's supposed to be incredibly emotionally unstable. But there's moments where I just feel like it doesn't make sense. Like, the extent to which she is obsessed with him. There's a scene in this book where she breaks into his house and puts his bottle of aftershave inside her and then takes it out, puts it back on his counter. There's also a scene where he sort of soft breaks up with her and starts ignoring her at school and stuff. And then her and her wee friend Franny go to a local diner to get milkshakes. And it's another scene where, again, we're dropped into the middle of the action. So the chapter starts when they're already sitting down at the diner eating or whatever. And then Waldo looks over and realizes that Mr. Corgi is also in the diner eating with his family. So she's there with her pals. He's over in the corner with his family. And she's like, oh, he's here. So the scene that you've set up there is either there was a moment where, and again, this girl is obsessed with this teacher. She broke into his house and put his objects inside of her. Either she came into the diner in this state where she's obsessed with this man and didn't see him, sat down with her friends, ordered food, started eating before she realised that the man she's obsessed with is in the room. I don't believe that. Or she was sitting down, again, she's still obsessed with this man at this point. She was sitting down eating and him and his family walked in and she didn't notice. What are we doing here? The book as a whole has a trajectory of she starts the book, she becomes obsessed with the teacher. The height of the book is them being utterly obsessed with each other and having this incredibly toxic grooming situation where they're both obsessed with each other. They get together and then she gets sick of him and eventually leaves him at the airport and sort of abandons him at the end. And it's like, yay, she left him. Woohoo. He never gets caught, which is really annoying. You want him to get caught and he doesn't. They just sort of peter out. They fizzle out like a normal couple, which obviously they're not a normal couple. One of them's a child. There is an incredibly obvious literal scene where she leaves him at the airport. We find out that in her childhood, and her mother went to the airport once. Her mother was going to go travel for a man, and then at the last minute they decided to turn around and not go. So we see this play out again years later with Waldo, where she was also going to go get on a plane for a man and then at the last minute decided not to and walks out, and that's what the book ends with. So there is like a trajectory in terms of their relationship, but I'm talking about scenes that happen at the height of her being obsessed with him, where we're supposed to believe that like 1 minute she's screaming, crying, throwing up because he hasn't answered her text messages, and then the next minute she's walking into a diner not noticing that he's there. She broke into his house and put his aftershave inside of her. Like, I don't believe that. This book also falls into a couple of my least favourite tropes, which is A, I hate reading about characters who want to be writers. I hate reading about characters who want to be authors. I don't know why, because it immediately just breaks the fourth wall for me and I feel like I'm reading about the author, not the character they've built, and it makes me feel like the character is just a vehicle for the author to talk through their own issues, which is fine, but for me, I don't like it. It breaks my immersion. This character wants to be an author, or she at least has an interest in creative writing, which is how she ends up, seducing her English teacher, which I use that word because that's what happens in the book. It is a grooming situation and he is at fault, even though she's the one that instigates it. I'm not victim blaming here. But there is a bit in this book where let me find it. I can't find it, but it's basically a scene where her and her English teacher, Mr. Corgi, are talking about books and about what she likes and doesn't like in certain authors. And she, as in Waldo, has a conversation with the teacher where she says she doesn't like flowery prose. She doesn't like it when authors use too many words. She wants them to just get straight to the point. Which is hilarious because that is my biggest criticism of this book, is the prose. It's not flowery in a way that evokes any sort of emotion or tension or makes you relate at all to the voice of the main character. But it's also not direct enough either. It makes you read every thought 4 different ways that add nothing and that leave you no room to think as the reader. No room to form your own opinions about what this character might be going through because she's far too literal about what she isn't thinking. It's like a self-report. The other trope that this book falls into that I don't like is that a character is in a self-help group or finds a self-help group that happens to cater to their incredibly specific problem. And what happens in this book is about 3/4 of the way through, maybe slightly more than that, the mum, Waldo's mum, who has her own issues with male validation and always being in rocky relationships with men because she thinks she needs a man in her life to make her whole, that these men are always toxic, whatever, blah, blah, blah. She's always craving male validation. She's always got these boyfriends coming in and out of the house, whatever. She finds a self-help group for women who are obsessed with male validation, and she gives Waldo like all this inspirational therapy talk about how to get over your need for validation from men. I have never heard of an Alcoholics Anonymous, but for people who are obsessed with male validation before. And I don't believe that exists. And it exists only so that the mother can pass that wisdom to her daughter. So the mum says to Waldo, so I tell her what's going on and she tells me I ought to join her for some Sex and Love Anonymous meetup group she's part of. Sex and Love Anonymous. And I've got nothing better to do, so I join her, right? And there's people telling spiels about ramming their cars into walls after breakups, sneaking in their husbands' trunks to catch them mid-affair, calling their SO's workplace 50 times a day, and each time I'm thinking, hey, that's me. Hey, that's me again. They're all a bunch of fucked up crazies, just like me. Never felt more home than I did in that meeting. And then the mum gives Waldo a pamphlet and says, look at that. Typical signs of love addiction include mistaking intense sexual experiences and new romantic excitement for love, blah, 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 blah. And then she goes on to tell Waldo extremely specific advice that pertains to Waldo's exact situation with her teacher. When would that ever happen? When would that ever happen? I would rather the story just have somebody find out what's going on between Waldo and her teacher and have an adult intervene, sit Waldo down and go, you have been groomed, here's what's happened, and here's how you get out of it. I'd rather have read that. Like, at no point in this story do they actually acknowledge the fact that the man Waldo's obsessed with is her teacher, her grown man teacher. The only person who ever acknowledges that is Franny, the best friend, in a scene that is told incredibly quickly and has zero repercussions. Nobody else at school ever finds out. So overall, this was just a really infuriating read. But I think the only reason it was infuriating is because I really, really, really did want to love it. For me, this is a 1-star book. Maybe 2 stars. Maybe 2 stars, actually, because the actual plot I didn't mind. It was the execution. Jeanette McCurdy is great. I really like her. I like her as a person, and I think she has a lot of really interesting things to say. In fact, I know she has a lot of really interesting things to say because she said a lot of them in her autobiography. I think she just does not know how to create a character voice yet. And that makes sense because this is a debut novel. I think that will come when she writes more books and gets more practice in. And I really, really, really genuinely do hope she does write more books. And if she does, I'll read them. That being said, I did not enjoy this one, but I really do hope she develops as a novelist. Overall, a disappointing read, but I'm glad I read it. Have you read Half His Age? Have you read I'm Glad My Mum Died? What did you think of either of them? What did you think of both of them? Do you agree with any of my points? Do you disagree with any of my points? Leave your opinion in the comment section below. I would love to know what you thought. Now, I have to go return this to the library because it is a month overdue. Luckily, my library doesn't do fines though, so I'm really new to making long-form content. I've always been a TikTok content creator, but I'm pivoting more to YouTube. If you like this longer style of video, please let me know in the comments or give it a wee like. I want to try and keep this up because it's fun and because I yap too much for TikTok and the long videos don't get views on there. So here we are instead. I'm going to be making all sorts on here, reviews, video essays, tier lists, deep dives into things I care about. So I hope you enjoy, and if you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching and goodbye!